My name is Marisol Delgado. I am 31 years old, and for most of my life I believed that if I worked hard enough, quietly enough, and without complaint, my father's family would eventually see me as one of their own. I was wrong. I figured that out on a Tuesday evening in October, standing on the shoulder of Route 9 in the dark, rain coming down in sheets, watching my stepmother's white SUV disappear around the bend. She had her turn signal on. She used her turn signal. That detail stuck with me longer than it probably should have. My name was on the company's payroll as Director of Operations. I had held that title for 4 years. Before that I was Assistant Director for 3, and before that I spent 2 years doing work that didn't have a title at all. The kind of work that gets done before anyone else arrives and after everyone else has gone home. I knew the vendor contracts by memory. I knew which accounts were slow paying and which ones would go dark in December if we didn't call them in November. I knew where my father kept the paper copies of the amended partnership agreement because I had filed them myself, in a green accordion folder, third shelf of the cabinet behind his office door. I was the one who had set up that filing system. None of that mattered to Renata. That was my stepmother's name. Renata Voss. She had married my father, Gabriel Delgado, 8 years before the Tuesday I am describing, when I was 23 and just 2 months into my first role at Delgado Property Management. The company my father had built from a single rental duplex in Fresno into a regional property management firm with 47 residential units and 3 commercial contracts across the Central Valley. My mother had passed when I was 16. My father had grieved in the way that very practical men grieve, quietly, efficiently, and then by remarrying 4 years later. Renata came with 2 things: a background in hospitality marketing and a son named Cole who was 26 and had, as far as I could observe, never filed anything. I thought about all of this as the rain soaked through my blazer. I thought about how I had driven Renata to the property inspection in Modesto that afternoon because her car was in the shop. I thought about how the argument had started in the parking lot of the property on Kiernan Avenue, over a vendor invoice I had flagged for review 3 weeks earlier, and how she had looked at me across the hood of my own car and said the thing she said, "I will get to that," and then walked around to the driver's side, gotten in and driven away. With my car. In the rain. I stood there for a moment. I folded the hem of my blazer back and smoothed it flat and said nothing to the empty road. If you are watching this and you have ever been the person in your family who does the work while someone else takes the credit, and I mean really does the work, the unglamorous, invisible, load-bearing work, then you already know exactly where this story is going, even if the details are different. Stay with me. Because the part that most people don't believe actually happened. My father started Delgado Property Management in 1997 with a duplex on Olive Avenue in Fresno that he had bought with money saved over 11 years driving a delivery truck. He used to tell the story at the dinner table when I was small, the same way every time. The 11 years, the savings account, the duplex, the first tenant who paid late. He told it like a lesson. I took it as one. By the time I joined the company at 23, I was not a stranger to how it ran. I had grown up watching my father balance paper ledgers at the kitchen table on Sunday nights, answering calls from tenants about broken heaters, driving out to units on Saturdays to assess repair requests so he could decide whether to call the plumber or handle it himself. When I came on, I already knew the names of the long-term tenants. I already knew which units needed re-roofing within 5 years. I already knew his vendors, his bank contact, his insurance broker. What I did not know, at 23, was that coming in with that kind of knowledge would eventually be held against me. The first time Renata dismissed me in front of other people, it was at a Sunday dinner 8 months after she and my father returned from their honeymoon. We were at the house on Fig Garden Drive, my father's house, the one I had grown up in. There were 7 people at the table. My father, Renata, Cole, Renata's sister Deb and Deb's husband, and 2 neighbors my father had invited because he liked to fill the table on Sundays. We had been talking about the company, or rather, my father had been talking about it the way he did, with pride, describing a new commercial contract we had just signed with a property owner in Clovis. I had sourced that contract. I had cold-called the property owner in August, sent the proposal in September, and negotiated the management fee terms over 3 separate calls before my father came in to sign. I mentioned simply that the Clovis property had taken about 4 months of follow-up to close. Renata looked at me across the table with an expression I would come to know very well over the following years. pleasant, slightly amused, the expression of a person correcting a child who has said something endearing but not quite accurate. "Gabriel closed that contract," she said. She said it to Deb's husband, not to me, as though she were clarifying a small misunderstanding for the benefit of the room. "He's been cultivating that relationship for a while now." My father did not correct her. He looked at his plate and reached for the bread. I picked up my fork and turned it once between my fingers and said nothing. The neighbors nodded. Cole refilled his water glass. The conversation moved on to something else, and the Clovis contract and the 4 months I had spent on it dissolved into the tablecloth as though they had never existed. That was the register Renata worked in. Not accusations. Not confrontations. Just small, smooth corrections delivered warmly in front of just enough people to make them land. After dinner, I helped clear the plates. Renata stood at the kitchen counter with a glass of wine and watched me stack the dishwasher and said, still in that pleasant voice, "You don't have to do all that, sweetheart. Cole will get it." Cole was on the patio. Cole had been on the patio since the meal ended. "I don't mind," I said. "You never do," she said, and there was something in the way she said it, appreciative on the surface, and underneath it something else entirely, something that said, "And that is exactly how I need you to stay." I finished stacking the dishwasher. I dried my hands on the dish towel and folded it back over the oven handle and went home. That pattern held for 7 years. I want to be precise about what those 7 years looked like, because I have noticed that when women describe this kind of situation, people sometimes assume it was a slow drift, a gradual erosion, something murky. It was not murky. It was consistent. It repeated itself in the same key, in different rooms, across different years, with a reliability that I eventually came to understand was not carelessness on Renata's part but design. In the spring of my 2nd year at the company, I restructured the vendor payment schedule after identifying that we were losing approximately $14,000 annually in late fees across 3 maintenance contractors. I presented the revised schedule to my father. He approved it. The following month, at a luncheon with our insurance broker, Renata mentioned offhandedly that Gabriel had tightened up the vendor side of things recently. The broker nodded and said it sounded like smart management. My father did not disagree. I had renegotiated our property insurance renewal that same quarter, cutting the annual premium by $9,200 by requesting a competing quote from a second carrier and bringing it back to our existing broker. I had handled every call, every document, every back and forth. When the renewal came in and my father saw the number, he shook my hand and said, "Good work." That evening at home, I know this because our office manager, Patrice, told me the following week, Renata called the broker personally to thank him for his flexibility. The broker, naturally, assumed she had been involved. That was the first time I understood that there were 2 ledgers being kept. One was the real one, the one inside my own head where I tracked what I had actually built. The other one was the one Renata was building in every room I was not in. I had managed our transition to a new property management software platform in my 3rd year, 90 days of data migration, staff retraining, and parallel system running, coordinated entirely by me while my father was recovering from a minor cardiac procedure. The company did not miss a single rent collection cycle during that transition. I have the email timestamps to prove it, though at the time I did not think to save them for any particular purpose. I saved them the way a careful person saves things, out of habit because I had always been the one who maintained the records. I had brought in 2 of our 5 largest residential clients through direct outreach and relationship building. One a landlord I had met at a property owners association meeting I had attended on my own initiative, one a referral I had cultivated over 18 months from a title company contact I maintained. Together, those 2 clients represented roughly $180,000 in annual management fees. I had written the operations manual that our 2 junior property managers used daily. Not adapted it, not summarized someone else's. Written it from scratch over 4 months of evenings because we had grown to a size where informal training was no longer sufficient and no one else was going to do it. I had covered for my father during a difficult 6-month stretch 2 years into Renata's tenure, when he was dealing with a health matter he had not yet disclosed to the staff, and during those 6 months I had made every operational decision, fielded every contractor escalation, managed every tenant complaint, and kept the financials current. I had done this without telling anyone what I was carrying. None of it appeared anywhere in the story Renata told about this company. The second distinct incident I remember clearly happened in my 6th year, at a holiday party we hosted at the office for clients and vendors. I had organized that party, the venue reservation, the catering order, the client gift selection, the invitations, the RSVPs, all of it. Renata arrived 40 minutes before guests, looked around the decorated room, and said to the first client who walked in the door, "We just love putting this together every year. It's our little thank you to everyone who makes this company what it is." She said we. She said our. She was holding a glass of sparkling water and smiling, and the client smiled back and said it was lovely, and Renata turned to introduce Cole, who had shown up that evening for the first time at any company function, as someone who was going to be getting more involved on the client relationship side going forward. My throat tightened. I held it there, behind my sternum, and I smiled at the client and said it was good to have him there, and I went to check on the caterers because there was nothing else useful I could do in that moment. Cole got a business card printed that December. It said Client Relations Associate. He had not, to my knowledge, introduced himself to a single existing client before that night. I filed the receipt for the holiday party under Q4 operating expenses. I filed Cole's business card order under the same folder because I was the one who processed it. By the time October came around in my 7th year, the shape of the thing was perfectly clear to me, even if I had not yet decided what to do about it. My father was 64. He had mentioned retirement, loosely, the way men who have built things sometimes do, as a concept, not a plan. Renata had begun mentioning Cole more frequently in conversations about the company's direction. Cole had been given an office, my old office, the one I had occupied for 3 years before taking the larger one adjacent to my father's, and he came in between 10 and noon most days and left by 3. I had said nothing about any of this. I was still, in October of that year, operating under the assumption that what I had built spoke for itself. Then came the inspection in Modesto. We drove out together that Tuesday morning, Renata and I, because one of our larger commercial tenants had flagged a list of maintenance concerns at the Kiernan Avenue property, and my father wanted a management-level walkthrough before we responded formally. It was a 2-hour drive. We talked about logistics most of the way. The tenant's specific complaints, the contractor we'd likely need to call, the timeline for the formal response letter. The walkthrough itself took most of the afternoon. The tenant's facility manager showed us through the space methodically. HVAC concerns, a drainage issue in the loading bay, 2 interior door frames that had warped over the summer. I took notes on all of it. I photographed the issues with my phone. I asked the questions that needed asking about the timeline of the drainage problem, because the answer would determine whether we were looking at a maintenance failure or a construction defect that predated our management contract. By the time we returned to the parking lot on Kiernan Avenue, it was nearly 5 o'clock and the sky had gone the color of a bruise. The argument started over the vendor invoice. 3 weeks earlier I had flagged an invoice from our primary HVAC contractor, $6,800 for a repair at one of our residential properties, because the labor hours log didn't match the work order description. I had put the invoice on hold pending clarification and sent an email to the contractor asking for a revised breakdown. The contractor had not yet responded, and Renata had apparently promised the contractor's owner, a man named Dwight, whom she had met at a Chamber of Commerce luncheon the previous spring, that the invoice would be paid by end of month. She told me this in the parking lot, standing next to my car, while the first drops of rain started coming down. "I need you to release that payment," she said. She said it the way she said most things, calm, certain, like the decision had already been made and she was informing me of it after the fact. "I have an open query with the contractor," I said. "Until I get a revised breakdown, I'm not comfortable authorizing." Marisol. She said my name the way you say the name of someone who is not quite understanding something simple. "Dwight has been with us for 9 years. This is not worth a relationship. It's a $6,800 invoice with an unexplained billing discrepancy," I said. "I'm not protecting a relationship by paying an invoice I can't verify." She looked at me for a moment. The rain was picking up. "You know what your problem is," she said. "You have always thought this company needed you more than it does. Your father built this without you. He'll be fine after you're gone too." I squared the notepad in my hands before I answered. I squared it and held it flat and looked at her. "I'm not releasing the invoice until I have the breakdown," I said. She held my gaze for one more second. Then she walked around to the driver's side of my car, opened the door, got in, and drove away. I stood in the parking lot on Kiernan Avenue in the rain, 36 miles from home, and I watched her taillights disappear at the end of the block. My phone was in my jacket pocket. I took it out. I looked at it for a moment, the rain dotting the screen, and then I made a call. Not to my father. Not to a cab. A black truck turned into the parking lot 4 minutes later and came to a stop in front of me. The driver's door opened and a man named Dom stepped out, unhurried, in a dark jacket, and looked at me across the roof of the truck the way people look at you when they have been waiting to be useful. "Ready," he said. "Ready," I said. I climbed in. The door closed. The rain came down on the parking lot, and I looked through the windshield at the empty space where my car had been, and I thought, she has no idea what she just started. The meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after Renata left me on Kiernan Avenue. My father had called it. That was the first thing. He had not asked me to call it, had not suggested it. He had put it on the calendar himself, which told me that Renata had gotten to him first, that whatever version of the parking lot she had brought home to Fig Garden Drive had landed the way she needed it to land. The invite said company direction, leadership team. The leadership team, as of that October, consisted of my father, Renata, Cole, and me. Patrice, our office manager, had not been included. I arrived at 8:30. I told Patrice I needed the conference room until noon and asked her to hold everything. Then I went to my father's office, to the cabinet behind the door, and I took out the green accordion folder from the third shelf. I had known it was there for 9 years. I had filed the amended partnership agreement myself, in the first year I joined the company, because my father had handed me a stack of documents to organize and the amended agreement had been in the stack. I had read it the way I read everything. Carefully, completely, and I had noted what it said and filed it and said nothing about it to anyone, because at 22 I had not yet understood what it meant. At 31 I understood exactly what it meant. I carried the folder to the conference room. I set it on the table to my right, closed. I took out my laptop. I opened the files I had been building for the past 3 weeks. The email records, the time-stamped vendor correspondence, the software migration logs, the client intake records, the signed proposal for the Clovis property, the insurance renewal documentation, the operations manual with its metadata intact, all of it organized in the order I intended to use it. I printed a copy of the relevant pages and arranged them in a second folder, a plain manila one, and set it on the table to my left, also closed. Then I squared both folders parallel to the edge of the table and waited. Cole arrived first, at 9:58, coffee in hand, and took the chair across from me without looking up from his phone. Renata came in at 10:01. She looked at me sitting there, at the 2 folders, at the laptop open in front of me, and something moved across her face. Not quite concern, more like recalibration. My father came in last, at 10:03. He looked tired. He sat at the head of the table, looked around the room, and said, "Let's talk about where things stand." I said, "Before we do, I'd like to put some documents on the table." Renata said, "Marisol, your father wants to." "I know what he wants," I said. "I'd like 2 minutes first." "Gabriel." My father looked at me for a moment. Then he nodded. I opened the manila folder on my left and placed the first page on the table. The Clovis property proposal, bearing my name, dated September 14th, 3 years prior. I placed it so my father could read it without turning it. "I sourced and closed the Clovis contract," I said. "The proposal is mine." The negotiation calls are documented in the email thread behind it. I placed the email printout behind the first page. 4 months of work. "Renata, you told our insurance broker that Gabriel had cultivated that relationship." Renata's expression held. "I restructured the vendor payment schedule in my second year," I continued. I placed the revised schedule on the table, with the summary calculation showing the $14,000 in recovered late fees. I renegotiated the insurance renewal the same quarter. I placed the competing quote request and the final renewal figure side by side. $9,200 saved. You called the broker to thank him personally after the renewal came in. This is not, Renata started. I'm not finished, I said. I placed the software migration log on the table. 90 days. 0 missed rent collections. My father was recovering from a cardiac procedure. I ran the company during that time and did not tell the staff why I was doing it, because he had not yet disclosed the situation. I looked at my father when I said that. His jaw tightened slightly, but he said nothing. I wrote the operations manual. I placed the printed title page with the document metadata showing my name and the date in the center of the table. From scratch. 4 months of evenings. I reached into the green accordion folder then. I took out the amended partnership agreement, 11 pages, dated 14 years ago, my father's signature on the last page, and I placed it on the table. The room was quiet. Cole looked up from his phone for the first time. The amended partnership agreement, I said. Filed in this office 14 years ago. Section 4, paragraph 3. I had marked the page with a small yellow tab. I turned it to face my father and set it down. A surviving operational partner who has served a minimum of 7 consecutive years in a management capacity and can demonstrate primary contribution to not less than 30% of the company's current annual revenue base retains the right to trigger a mandatory equity review. I folded my hands on the table. I have been in a management capacity for 9 years, I said. The 2 client accounts I source directly represent approximately $180,000 of our annual fee revenue. Our total annual management fee revenue last year was $490,000. That is 36.7%. I looked at Renata. I had the calculation verified by an outside CPA 2 weeks ago. The silence after that was different from the silences I had learned to hold for 7 years. It was not mine to fill. My father said, very quietly, "Where did you get that agreement?" "From your filing cabinet," I said. 3rd shelf. I filed it there myself. You handed it to me in a stack of documents in my first month at this company. He looked at the agreement. He looked at it for a long time. Renata said, "Gabriel, this is not what she's." "Renata," my father said. He said it with a flatness I had never heard from him before. He said it the way you say a name when you want someone to stop talking. She stopped. I want to tell you what Renata said to me before I give you the rest because I think it matters. She said it in the hallway, after my father had asked her and Cole to give us a few minutes, after Cole had walked out without making eye contact with anyone. She came around the table and stood in the doorway and looked at me the way she had looked at me across the parking lot on Kiernan Avenue, controlled, deliberate, certain she was still the one holding something over me. "You think this changes what you are to this family," she said. I looked at her. "You said," I told her, at a Sunday dinner 8 years ago, that Gabriel had closed the Clovis contract. "You said it to your sister's husband while I was sitting at the table. I was looking at you when you said it." She said nothing. "You said, at our holiday party 4 years ago, that we put it together every year. You were holding a glass of sparkling water. I had spent 3 weeks organizing that event. The catering receipt is in the Q4 folder with my initials on it." Her chin lifted just slightly. "You said, in the parking lot on Kiernan Avenue, that my father built this company without me and that he would be fine after I was gone." I said it evenly. "I drove home in Dom's truck that night and I spent the next 3 weeks pulling together documentation I should have been keeping all along. So in a way, you were right that I needed a lesson. It just wasn't the one you had in mind." She stood there for one more moment. Then she walked down the hallway toward the front of the office, and I heard the exterior door open and close. I went back into the conference room. My father was still sitting at the head of the table, the amended partnership agreement open in front of him. He had his reading glasses on. He looked smaller than he had looked an hour ago and older, and for just a moment I felt something complicated move through me. Not triumph, not quite, but something that had sorrow in it alongside everything else. This was still my father. That had never been the wound. The wound had always been that he had let it happen. "I should have paid more attention," he said. "Yes," I said. "You should have." He looked up at me over his glasses. He had the expression of a man who understood, finally, the full cost of the thing he had allowed. "I want to meet with the attorney," he said. "This week." "I have an appointment set for Friday at 2, I said. "Marcus Osei's office. I CC'd you on the confirmation email last Thursday." He almost smiled. "Of course you did." I gathered my folders. I left the amended partnership agreement on the table in front of him. The equity review was filed formally 6 weeks later. Cole resigned from his client relations associate position the same month. Or rather, he stopped coming in, which in Cole's case amounted to the same thing. Renata and my father had conversations I was not part of, and whatever passed between them in those conversations left a mark I could see in the way my father moved through the office in the months that followed. More carefully, more quietly, as though he was relearning the geography of something he had walked through for years without really seeing it. She did not leave. I want to be honest about that. Life is not a courtroom drama, and people do not always exit cleanly. Renata and my father were still married. She still came to the office sometimes. But she did not sit in the conference room anymore, and she did not speak in the language of small corrections, at least not anywhere I could hear her. Whether that was conscience or calculation, I genuinely do not know. What I know is that my name was on the revised partnership documents when they were finalized in January, and that the equity review resulted in a 22% stake transfer that our attorney documented in 47 pages, and that when I walked out of Marcus Osei's office on the day we signed, the afternoon was cold and clear, and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and felt the cold on my face and thought about the Tuesday in October when I had stood in a parking lot in Modesto Inn. The rain and watched taillights disappear. I have thought a lot about the green accordion folder in the months since January. I filed that document at 22 years old in my first month at the company without knowing what it meant. I spent the next 9 years building the kind of record that would make it mean something. I did not do that strategically. I did it because I am the kind of person who maintains records, who saves the email thread, who logs the call, who files the receipt with her initials on it. That is just who I am. And for a long time, being that kind of person felt like the least glamorous thing in the world. It felt like evidence of exactly the role Renata had cast me in, the one who does the work quietly while other people put their names on it. What I understand now, and what took me an embarrassingly long time to understand, is that the record itself was always the thing. Not the recognition. Not the gratitude. The record. Because recognition can be redirected and gratitude can be swallowed by a room, but a timestamp on a document is not something anyone can walk around the table and smooth away. I do not think my father is a bad man. I think he married a woman who was very good at building a story, and I think he was tired, and I think it is easy to believe the story that is being told to you inside your own house when you come home at the end of the day and someone you love is the one telling it. I think the saddest thing about those 7 years is not what Renata did. She was protecting a position she wanted for her son, and I can at least follow the logic of that, but that my father was present for all of it and chose, again and again, to look at his plate. That is the thing that I am still working through, honestly. Not the equity. The plate. But here is what I will say, for whoever is watching this, whoever has been the one in your family or your workplace who carries the weight that nobody photographs, keep the records. Not out of suspicion. Not because you are planning for war. Keep them because you did the work, and the work deserves to exist somewhere permanent, somewhere outside the dinner table, somewhere that doesn't depend on anyone else deciding to remember it accurately. You are not asking to be celebrated. You are just refusing to be erased. If this story sat with you, if you recognized something in it, something from your own kitchen table or your own office hallway, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the most useful thing we can do for each other is say, I see that. It happened to me too. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment purposes. Names, characters, and events are entirely fictional, and any resemblance to real persons or real situations is coincidental.